Hi guys, time for chapter 2. We are reading a book by the author, Roald Dahl. The author is the person who writes the book. The book is called The Witches, the T-H-E spelled the or the Witches, and the illustrator, that means the person who draws all of the fantastic pictures, is called Quentin Blake. Okay, so get yourself nice and cozy, somewhere where you're happy, and get ready for me to read. Now remember, yesterday we found out that witches are everywhere. We found out there are about 100 in our country. Can I just remind you, this is a story. Yeah, this is a book. This is fiction, which means it's not real. Okay, so don't go telling everyone that Mr. Alamo told me there's witches everywhere. It's fine, it's just a story, okay? And if it's too scary, turn me off. But it shouldn't be, it is a children's book. So we know there are witches everywhere, and we know that, so I'm very aware, I'm just doing my eyebrows at the moment. Lockdown problems, they've gone very dark. It's fine, I'll rub it off. Witches are everywhere, and we can't tell where they are because they look like everyone else. They just look like normal, nice women. They could be the shopkeeper. They could be the doctor that's looking at you. They could be your teacher. I'm not a witch, I promise. I promise I'm not trying to snuff you all off, I promise. So we know that about witches. And we know that that they don't like children, and they try to kill off one child every week, don't they? So shall we find out about my grandmother? I myself had 2 separate encounters, that means meetings, with witches before I was 8 years old. From the first, I escaped unharmed, but on the second occasion, I was not so lucky. Things happened to me that will probably make you scream when you read about them. That can't be helped. The truth must be told. The fact that I'm still here and able to speak to you, however peculiar I may look, is due entirely to my wonderful grandmother. My grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians know all about witches, for Norway, which is where Norwegians come from, with its black forests and icy mountains, is where the first witches came from. My father and my mother were also Norwegian, but because my father had a business in England, and I had been born there and had lived there and had started going to English school, twice a year, at Christmas, in the summer, we went back to Norway to visit my grandmother. This old lady, as far as I could gather, was of just about the only surviving relative we had on either side of our family. So she's the only relative, the only person related to them, the only family member still alive on either side, so on mum's side and on dad's side of the family. She was my mother's mother, and I absolutely adored her. That means she loved her lots and lots and lots. We all love our grandparents, don't we? Yeah. And think about all the nice things grandparents do for us. I mean, my grandma cooks me pizza every time I go around, but makes me nice like orange juices, and you know, she just always treats us. She's such a sweetheart. So yeah, you guys think about your grandparents. We've had this discussion before. A lot of your grandparents, you think of them as doing nice things for you. Some of them, you said that they played with you. Some of you said that they cooked nice food for you, or gave you sweets, or took you nice places. So yeah, so the person whose voice this book is in, the first person, remember it's an I, loves his grandmother. When she and I were together, we spoke in either Norwegian or in English. It didn't matter which. We were equally fluent in both languages. This means they spoke both languages just as well as the other. So he could speak English very well, and he could speak Norwegian very well, and so could grandmother. And I have to admit, I felt closer to her than to my mother. That's interesting. Soon after my 7th birthday, my parents took me to, as usual, to spend Christmas with my grandmother in Norway. And it was over there, while my father and mother and I were driving in the icy weather just north of Oslo, that the car skidded off the road and went tumbling into a rocky ravine. That's like a pit, a rocky pit. My parents were killed, I was firmly strapped into the back seat and received only a cut on the forehead. No, this is not Harry Potter. I won't go into the horrors of that terrible afternoon. I still get shivers when I think about it. I finished up, of course, back in my grandmother's house with her arms around me tight and both of us crying the whole night long. What are we going to do now? I asked her through the tears. Oh, look, this is boy and grandmother crying all night through. How sad. At least he's got his grandmother there, his favourite person to help him through it. You will stay with me, she said, and I will look after you. I can't actually do a Norwegian accent. I'm just going by the film. This is what it kind of sounded like. Aren't I going back to England? No, she said. I could never do that. Heaven shall take my soul, but Norway shall keep my bones. The very next day, in order that we might both try to forget our great sadness, my grandmother started telling me stories. She was a wonderful storyteller, and I was enthralled by everything she told me. That means captured, engrossed, tranced. It means that she told him things and he took them in and loved it. You know that feeling when you're listening to someone tell a story and you're so fixated on what they're saying that you get all excited? That's how he feels when his grandmother tells him a story. But I didn't become really excited until she got onto the subject of witches. She was apparently a great expert on these creatures, and she made it very clear to me that her witch stories, unlike most of the others, were not imaginary tales. They were all true. They were gospel truth. They were history. So they were part of history. They were part of the truth. Everything she was telling me about witches had actually happened, and I had better believe it. What was worse, what was far, far worse, was that witches were still with us. They were all around us, and I had better believe that too. Are you really being truthful, Grandmama? Really and truly truthful? My darling, she said, you won't last long in this world if you don't know how to spot a witch when you see one. But you told me that witches look like ordinary women, Grandmama. So how can I spot them? You must listen to me, my grandmother said. You must remember everything I tell you. After that, all you can do is cross your heart and pray to heaven and hope for the best. We were in the big living room of her house in Oslo, and I was ready for bed. The curtains were never drawn in that house, and through the windows I could see huge snowflakes falling slowly onto the outside world that was as black as tar. Ooh, I like that. Why do I like it? It's a simile. As black as tar. It's a simile compares one thing to something else. It says it's like something. So it's saying that the world is as black as that ooey gooey thick tar you get. Ooh, I do love a simile. Such a geek, me. My grandmother was tremendously old. Tremendously very, or big. Tremendous can also be big, but tremendously old, very old. And wrinkled, with a massive, wide body that was smothered in grey lace. She sat there, majestic in her armchair. Majestic, like majesty, like royalty. So she's like a queen. Majestic, like a queen. Filling every inch of it because she's so big she fills the whole armchair. Not even a mouse could have squeezed in to sit beside her. I myself, just 7 years old, was crouched on the floor at her feet, wearing pyjamas, dressing gown and slippers. You swear you aren't pulling my leg? That's telling me a joke, but trying to trick me. I kept saying to her, you swear you aren't just pretending? Listen, she said. I have known no less than 5 children who have simply vanished off the face of this earth, never to be seen again. The witches took them. I think you're just trying to frighten me, I said. I am trying to make sure you don't go the same way, she said. I love you, and I want you to stay with me. Tell me about the children who disappeared, I said. My grandmother was the only grandmother I ever met who smoked cigars. She lit one now, a long black cigar that smelt of burning rubber. The first child I knew who disappeared, she said, was called Rangehild Hansen. Rangehild was 8 at the time. She was playing with her little sister on the lawn. Her mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of air. Where's Rangehild? She asked. She went away with the tall lady, the little sister said. What tall lady? The mother said. I keep switching voices. It's supposed to be the grandmother talking. I'll try that again. She went with the tall lady, the sister said. What tall lady? The mother said. The tall lady in white gloves, the little sister said. She took Rangehild by the hand, led her away. No one, my grandmother said, ever saw Rangehild again. Didn't they search for her? I asked. They searched for miles around. Everyone in town helped, but they never found her. What happened to the other 4 children? I asked. They vanished, just as Rangehild did. How, Grandmama? How did they vanish? In every case, the strange lady was seen outside the house just before it happened. But how did they vanish? I asked. The second one was very peculiar, my grandmother said. There was a family called Christiansen. They lived up in Holmenkollen, and they had an old oil painting in their living room, and they were very, very proud of it. The painting showed some ducks in the yard outside a farmhouse. There were no people in the painting, just a flock of ducks on the grassy farmyard and the farmhouse in the background. It was a large painting and rather pretty. Well, one day their daughter Solveig came home from school eating an apple. She says the nice lady gave it to her on the street. The next morning, little Solveig was not in her bed. The parents searched everywhere, but they couldn't find her. Then, all of a sudden, her father shouted, "There she is! That's Solveig, feeding the ducks!" He was pointing at the oil painting, and sure enough, Solveig was in it. Look, there's the oil painting of the ducks, with the farmhouse in the background, and look, there's Solveig in the oil painting. She was standing in the farmyard in an act of throwing bread to the ducks out of a basket. The father rushed up to the painting and touched her, but that didn't help. She was simply part of the painting, just a picture painted on a canvas. The canvas is like the bit of the painting. So you see that up there? Yeah, the front bit would be the canvas, even though that's not a painting. The front bit would be the canvas. It's the thing that you paint on, like sort of like paper. Did you ever see that painting, Grandmama, with the little girl in it? Many times, my grandmother said. And the peculiar thing was that little Solveig kept changing her position in the picture. So she kept moving in the picture. One day she would actually be inside the farmhouse and you could see her face looking out the window. Another day she would be far over to the left. We know I don't know my lefts from my rights. The left, with a duck in her arms. Did you see her moving in the picture, Grandmama? Nobody did. Wherever she was, whether outside feeding the ducks or inside looking out of the window, she was always motionless. Motionless means not moving. Just a figure painted in oils. It was all very odd, my grandmother said. Very odd indeed. And what was most odd of all was as the years went by, she kept growing older in the picture. In 10 years, the small girl had become a young woman. In 30 years, she was middle-aged. Then, all at once, 54 years after it all happened, she disappeared from the picture altogether. 54 years later, she was about 10, maybe 64, quite a young age to die, but I'm hoping you're all thinking that I did, that she probably died. You mean she died? I said. Who knows, my grandmother said. Some very mysterious things go on in the world of witches. That's 2 you've told me about, I said. What's happened in the 3rd one? I'm going to have to leave it there because I'm very aware that it's been 17 minutes and I don't want to keep going. Okay? Right. I hope you enjoyed that. We'll finish this chapter in the next video. Bye, guys.